Outland is a film most people have never heard of. It changed science fiction forever. Director Peter Hyams was so terrified of being sued that he met with the writer of High Noon to confess he'd stolen the entire plot. Sean Connery walked off set for 2 days demanding more filth, and NASA advisors told Hyams that heads don't explode in vacuums. But he ignored them because physics is boring, an exploding head is a movie. These are 14 facts about the forgotten film that introduced the dirty space aesthetic, used revolutionary Introvision technology, and almost killed Sean Connery in the ending before the studio chickened out. 1. The High Noon legal scare Outland is an almost beat-for-beat remake of the 1952 classic Western High Noon. Transplanted from the Old West to a mining colony on Jupiter's moon Io, director Peter Hyams was so worried about being sued for plagiarism that he arranged a personal meeting with Carl Foreman, the original screenwriter of High Noon.
I'll do that.
He went to confess what he was doing and ask permission. Foreman's response was both weary and generous. "Go ahead, I've seen 3 other remakes this year." He'd watched his story structure recycled countless times across different genres, long since stopped caring about originality. Hyams kept the signature countdown clock mechanic, showing exact time until the villains arrive, as deliberate homage to the tension-building technique that made High Noon effective. Sometimes the best creative choice is honest theft rather than pretending you've invented something new. 2. Sean Connery's Bond strike. Sean Connery was notoriously demanding during Outland. They're treating it with the same seriousness he'd bring to a prestige drama despite it being a low-budget science fiction film. During the climactic final shootout, Connery abruptly walked off set and refused to return for 2 full days. The problem? He felt the lighting and atmosphere were too clean and too cinematic. He insisted the mining colony should feel like a genuinely sweaty, disgusting industrial hellhole, not a sleek science fiction set. He refused to continue until the crew literally dumped more dust, steam, and grime onto the environment. The production scrambled to add practical smoke machines and scatter additional industrial debris. His stubbornness actually improved the film, making the world feel more lived in and oppressive. 3. The exploding head. Science lie. The most infamous scene involves a worker's head violently exploding when exposed to vacuum during a decompression accident. Multiple biologists and NASA advisors explicitly told Hyams that rapid vacuum exposure would cause a body to swell grotesquely and the blood to boil from pressure changes. But the skull wouldn't literally pop like an overfilled balloon. The physics don't support explosive cranial rupture. Hyams listened politely to the scientific explanation, then completely ignored it. His statement in interviews, "Physics is boring. An exploding head is a movie." He understood that scientific accuracy was less important than creating a viscerally shocking image audiences would never forget. The exploding head became the film's most memorable visual moment, proving Hyams right about the value of spectacle over accuracy. 4. The Introvision Trick. To maximize visual scope on Outland's modest $16 million budget, Hyams utilized revolutionary technology called Introvision, still experimental in 1981. The system allowed actors to physically walk inside highly detailed miniature sets without traditional blue screen compositing. This is why the Con-Am 27 mining colony looks so impossibly massive and architecturally complex. Sean Connery and other actors were actually walking through elaborate scale models, only about 4 feet tall in reality. The process used mirrors and precise optical alignment to seamlessly blend full-size actors with miniature environments in camera, creating scale that would have been prohibitively expensive with full-size sets. The technology was later used in Dune and Firefox, but Outland was one of its first major applications. 5. The dirty sci-fi aesthetic. Outland followed and expanded the used future visual aesthetic pioneered by Ridley Scott's Alien 2 years earlier. rejecting the clean, pristine vision of space travel that had dominated science fiction since 2001, A Space Odyssey. Hyams gave explicit instructions to deliberately age and distress every single piece of equipment, making everything look worn, broken, and barely functional. The art department purchased real industrial components from a decommissioned oil refinery in England, incorporating actual rusted pipes, pressure gauges, and control panels into the sets. This is why the high-tech computers and machinery look like repurposed 1970s industrial boilers, because that's literally what they are. The aesthetic reinforced the film's central theme. Space exploitation is just dirty, blue-collar industrial work with no romance or glamour. 6. The polydichloric Euthimal reality. The fictional drug at the center of Outland's conspiracy, polydichloric Euthimal, was designed as a plausible futuristic version of real-world performance-enhancing stimulants. The screenwriters conducted serious research into actual workhorse drugs used in extreme occupational environments. Deep-sea saturation diving, long-haul trucking, anywhere workers are chemically sustained through inhumanly long shifts. They studied documented psychological effects of amphetamine abuse, the paranoia, violent psychotic breaks, inability to sleep, to ensure drug-induced breakdown scenes felt medically grounded rather than generic movie madness. The name itself was constructed to sound like a legitimate pharmaceutical compound with proper chemical nomenclature. And the attention to pharmacological detail gives the drug conspiracy more credibility than most science fiction bothers with for fictional substances. 7. The Master Model Maker. The Io mining colony designated Conam-27 was physically built by the same model-making team that created the Nostromo spacecraft for Alien 2 years earlier. Because they used identical construction techniques, specifically the greebling method of adding thousands of tiny mechanical parts to create visual complexity, many fans mistakenly believe Outland and Alien take place in the same shared universe. The visual DNA is so similar that the films feel aesthetically related, even though they have no narrative connection. The reuse of the same craftspeople created unintentional design continuity, and suggesting a coherent vision of what industrial space exploitation might realistically look like. It helped establish the dirty space aesthetic as the dominant visual language for science fiction throughout the 1980s. 8. The zero-G wire pain. In 1981, wirework technology for simulating weightlessness was still extremely primitive and physically punishing. During airlock sequences, performers had to be suspended by thin, unpadded steel cables that cut painfully into their hips and ribs for extended periods. Connery reportedly despised the harness system so intensely that he insisted on completing most floating scenes in single, continuous takes. Minimizing time spent hanging from the excruciating wires, the physical discomfort shows in some footage. The actors genuinely look strained and uncomfortable, which actually enhances realism of people struggling in an alien environment. Modern wire work uses much more sophisticated harness systems with padding and weight distribution. But Outland's cast suffered through brutally uncomfortable practical effects to achieve the weightless illusion. 9. The Doctor with a Grudge. Frances Sternhagen, who played cynical station physician Dr. Lazarus, was specifically cast because she didn't look or act like a typical Hollywood leading lady. Hyams deliberately wanted an older, unglamorous, world-weary woman to serve as the unexpected moral conscience of the film, rejecting the convention of young, attractive female characters. Sternhagen and Connery developed such genuine affection during production that they reportedly spent all breaks playing cards together, is completely ignoring the rest of the predominantly male cast. Their natural rapport translated into the on-screen relationship between O'Neill and Lazarus, a genuine friendship between equals rather than forced romantic subplot. Sternhagen's performance as the sarcastic, pragmatic doctor became one of the film's unexpected highlights, proving character actors could anchor science fiction just as effectively as movie stars. 10. The Real-Life Io Volcanos. While Outland was still in production, NASA's Voyager 1 transmitted the first close-up photographs of Jupiter's moon Io back to Earth. Stunning discovery. Io is the most volcanically active body in the entire solar system, covered in active volcanoes and sulfuric lava flows. This revelation came after the production design for Outland's Io surface had already been largely completed, based on older, less accurate scientific speculation. Hyams had to quickly scramble to add volcanic glow visual effects to background shots of the moon's surface visible through colony windows. The production couldn't afford to rebuild all the Io exterior miniatures. They compromised by adding atmospheric orange lighting and occasional animated lava flows. A perfect example of how real-world science can unexpectedly impact science fiction filmmaking mid-production. 11. The banned shotgun tech. The futuristic pump-action shotguns carried by federal marshals were actually heavily modified Remington 870s, fitted with heat shields, electronic targeting sights, and custom furniture. The film's armorers modified them so convincingly that UK customs officials briefly seized and detained the weapons during international transport to Pinewood Studios. Authorities determined they were functionally indistinguishable from actual military-grade riot control weapons. The production had to provide extensive documentation proving they were legitimate film props with proper licensing before customs would release them. The incident actually validated the prop department's work. If law enforcement couldn't tell they were modified movie props, audiences certainly wouldn't question their authenticity. The practical weaponry contributed to Outland's gritty tone compared to films using, obviously, fake laser guns. 12. The James Bond Easter egg hidden detail in the scene where Marshall O'Neill scrolls through digital personnel files on a computer terminal. One of the employee names briefly flashing across the screen is a deliberate subtle reference to a former James Bond producer Connery had worked with during his 007 years. Connery's private way of symbolically burying his Bond past inside his new science fiction future, acknowledging the franchise that made him famous while demonstrating he'd moved beyond it. The Easter egg is so quick and obscure that virtually no one notices it without frame-by-frame analysis. But for Connery, it represented a personal closure ritual. He was declaring he was now a serious dramatic actor who happened to be working in genre film, not just that guy who played James Bond. 13. The Suicidal Final Contract. In the original screenplay, Marshall O'Neill doesn't survive the final confrontation with corporate hired assassins. He was supposed to deliberately blow the airlock and sacrifice himself to take the killers with him, dying as a tragic martyr for law and justice in a lawless frontier. A much bleaker, more morally complex ending, emphasizing the futility of one honest man fighting systemic corruption. Warner Brothers absolutely refused to allow the death of Sean Connery's character, fearing it would devastate the film's already uncertain box office potential. They forced a rewrite to the happy ending where O'Neill survives, punches out the corporate villain, and presumably continues his lonely crusade. The compromise ending is more commercially palatable, but it loses the original's thematic power about the cost of integrity. 14. The missing spacewalk crucial detail even observant viewers miss. There was a legendary deleted sequence. An extended zero-gravity chase outside the mining colony where Marshall O'Neill has to emergency patch his damaged spacesuit with duct tape while being actively shot at. The scene was filmed and completed but cut from the final release. The visual effects looked noticeably too fake compared to the rest of the film's convincing practical work. Poor effects would have undermined the gritty realism, so Hyams reluctantly removed the entire sequence. But if you look carefully during the final shootout inside the colony, you can still see the emergency patch visible on Connery's spacesuit. Physical evidence of the deleted scene that continuity editors forgot to remove, a ghost of a sequence that no longer exists. So if you were offered a high-paying mining job on Jupiter's moon with double hazard pay and no questions asked, are you taking the paycheck or staying safely on Earth? The film's answer: some money isn't worth what it costs you. Let me know in the comments if the exploding head was brilliant shock or a bridge too far. If you want more deep dives into forgotten films that turn space into a crime scene, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.